Welcome back to Outside Views EU. Today we're diving into one of the most important and often controversial aspects of the European Union's financial structure, the contributions made by member states and the ongoing debate about net contributors versus net recipients. Now, when we talk about financial contributions to the EU, each member state is expected to contribute a certain amount to the EU budget. This budget is used to fund a variety of programs across the Union, from agricultural subsidies to infrastructure projects, scientific research, and much more. But not every country contributes the same amount, and not every country receives the same level of funding from the EU. And that's where the terms net contributors and net recipients come into play. A net contributor is a member state that pays more into the EU budget than it receives in funding. On the other hand, a net recipient is a country that receives more in funding from the EU than it contributes. And this dynamic has sparked quite a bit of debate, both among politicians and even the public. So today, let's break this down. Why does this system exist in the first place? The EU was designed as a union of both economic and political cooperation. One of the goals has always been to reduce disparities between the richer and the poorer regions. And that's where the redistribution of resources comes in. The idea is that wealthier countries contribute more so that less economically developed regions can catch up and develop. In theory, this benefits the entire union, as a stronger economy in one country can lead to more trade, investment, and economic stability across the entire EU. But as you might imagine, not everyone is happy with this arrangement. Let's start with a perspective of the net contributors. Countries like Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Sweden are typically the largest net contributors to the EU budget. These countries argue that while they are paying in more than they receive, the benefits they get from the single market and the overall stability of the EU outweigh the direct financial imbalance. However, there are political forces in these countries that feel differently. They argue that the current system puts an unfair burden on their taxpayers. For example, Eurosceptic parties in some of these countries often campaign on the idea that their nation is being forced to subsidize less developed countries. The idea is that their taxpayers' money is being used to prop up economies elsewhere without enough tangible benefits returning home. This is a powerful narrative, and one that's gained traction in recent years, especially in the context of national elections. And we can't talk about this without mentioning Brexit. One of the driving forces behind the Leave campaign was the argument that the UK was a net contributor to the EU and that leaving the Union would free up money to spend domestically, though the actual economic impact of Brexit is, of course, a much more complex issue. But the point remains. The question of financial contribution plays a significant role in shaping public opinion about the EU. Now, on the other side of this debate, we have the net recipients. These are typically countries in Eastern and Southern Europe, such as Poland, Hungary, and Greece. And these countries argue that the funding they receive from the EU is vital for their economic development. In Poland, for instance, EU funds have been used to build new roads, modernize infrastructure, and support agriculture. And the argument from these countries is that this investment is not only helping them, but is also beneficial for the entire union in the long run. A more developed Poland, for example, means a stronger economy that can contribute more to the EU in the future. And it's not just economic development. EU funding also support programs in education, research, and environmental protection, all of which can have a long-term positive impact across the Union. However, this side of the debate isn't without its controversies either. Some critics argue that countries receiving significant EU funds should be more closely scrutinized in terms of how the money is spent. There have been accusations that some governments, particularly in Hungary and Poland, have misused EU funds or implemented policies that go against the EU's core values while still receiving financial support. And this has led to calls for a stronger link between financial contributions and adherence to EU principles such as democracy and the rule of law. So where does this leave us? The debate over net contributors and net recipients is unlikely to go away anytime soon. It's a fundamental part of the broader conversation about the future of the EU. As long as there are significant economic disparities between member states, there will be need for redistribution through the EU budget. But the question is how to balance this in a way that maintains the political and social cohesion of the Union. One potential solution that's been proposed is reforming the EU's funding mechanisms to make them more equitable or to tie financial contributions more closely to economic performance. Others have suggested cutting funding to countries that do not adhere to EU values, particularly in the areas of democracy and the rule of law, as I said. At the same time, there's also the broader challenge of explaining the benefits of EU membership to the public in net contributor countries. Because while the financial imbalance might seem unfair at first glance, the economic benefits of being part of a single market with free movement of goods, people, services and capital are often overlooked in these discussions. In conclusion, the debate over net contributors versus net recipients is about more than just money. It's about how the EU functions as a union of both economic and political cooperation. It's about balancing national interests with the broader goal of European integration. And it's about ensuring that the EU remains a place where all member states, regardless of their economic size, can benefit and thrive. So thanks for watching Outside Views EU, and as always, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time, and the next video is right here in the end screen.